Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Today I want to talk about an incident that happened right here in Canada. A guy brought a nail gun to a protest and got into some confrontations with it. So I want to go through this video with you guys and sort of talk about the legalities, because this actually triggers a whole lot of different laws. It's actually a really complicated sort of situation, and I think it's an interesting opportunity to talk about some of those laws. So we're going to watch the video. This is originally from a video that was filmed in a vertical format. I don't know the original source. I'll link to a place where you can see the original. I'm really focused on the nail gun on this rather than the identity of this person. So I don't really care what side he's on or whatever. I want to talk about the law. Okay, let's watch the video. So here we go.
You have a fucking problem? Huh? You have a problem?
How dare you?
Don't you fucking...
Why are you doing that?
So one thing I want you to note here, he's brought this up into sort of a clearly, he's pointing it at the other person, and you can see his other hand is towards the sort of muzzle of this nail gun. And that's because these nail guns have a safety measure that normally prevents them from being fired unless they're up against a surface. But he appears to be holding onto that safety lever to allow it to fire even though it's not pressed up against somebody. So that's concerning because it says that this is ready to go. Now, a nail gun doesn't tend to be effective against people at much more than a short distance, but still, you never know. And we'll talk about the legalities and sort of how much damage a nail gun can do and various other things, because that's relevant.
You just shot that at me, and you shot it at another guy. Who the hell are you? Don't do that, guys.
And that's the smart thing he does here, is he puts the nail gun away after he's already pointed it at people. And you can see that there's a claim that he actually shot it at the person filming. I don't know who that is, but she claims that he shot it at her. Okay, so that is our video. We're going to now go and have a look at some of the law on this one, because the law here is complicated in all sorts of fun ways. And when I say fun, I mean, if you're a lawyer, it's fun. For most people, it's just complicated. So let's start with the definition of firearm, because that's going to tell us a fair bit about what we do here. So firearm means a barreled weapon from which any shot, bullet, or other projectile can be discharged, and that is capable of causing serious bodily injury or death to a person, and includes any frame or receiver of such a barreled weapon and anything that can be adapted for use as a firearm. Now you might say, okay, well, a nail gun is not a weapon. However, the case of Falauka actually basically writes that out, because the definition of weapon specifically says that it includes any firearm. So to resolve that, they basically said weapon in this is irrelevant, and so a firearm means a barreled object from which any shot, bullet, or other projectile can be discharged, and that is capable of causing serious bodily injury or death to a person. Now, the Supreme Court, in the case of Dunn, basically accepted a test that had been used informally for many years, which is serious bodily injury or death can include anything that can puncture an eyeball. So the question is, if you fire a nail gun right into someone's eye, would it puncture an eyeball? And the answer to that is almost assuredly yes. When I look at this video, I spent some time trying to figure out which nail gun it is, and it appears that it's a Milwaukee M18 fuel framing nail gun, which is more than capable of causing pretty serious injury. However, it is unlikely that it can shoot over 500 feet per second, which is going to be relevant for our next portion of the test, which is whether or not this thing is a what's called either an unclassified firearm, or I prefer to call them 84 sub 3 firearms after the section of the criminal code that they refer to. These are complicated as to how they work. So let's pull that up. So certain weapons deemed not to be firearms. And for the purposes of certain sections of the criminal code, and they number them off, and the provisions of the Firearms Act, totally, the following weapons are deemed not to be firearms. And that includes any antique firearm. This is not an antique firearm. Any device that is, and the first one is our sort of critical one here, designed exclusively for signaling, for notifying of distress, for firing blank cartridges, or firing stud cartridges, explosive-driven rivets, or other industrial projectiles. A nail would count as an other industrial projectile, so it would fall under category B, except intended by the person in possession of it to be used exclusively for the purpose for which it is designed. Now, this thing is designed for nailing wood, and he appears to want to use it to nail people or to threaten people. So that would take it outside of intended by the person in possession of it to be used exclusively for the purpose for which it is designed. So the whole B category here is out. C is for projectiles for slaughtering domestic animals, tranquilizing animals, or discharging projectiles with lines attached to them. That doesn't apply here. And D is actually going to be his most useful aspect because it's any other barreled weapon where it is proved that the weapon is not designed or adapted to discharge a shot, bullet, or other projectile at a muzzle velocity exceeding 152.4 meters per second, or at a muzzle energy exceeding 5.7 joules. This is a little bit complicated because they use multiple negatives here, but basically it will be an 84 sub 3 firearm so long as the muzzle velocity is below 152.4 meters per second, which just happens to be 500 feet per second or thereabouts, or at a muzzle, or if the muzzle energy is below 5.7 joules. Now, in this case, this nail gun will have a muzzle energy that exceeds 5.7 joules, but it's going to be well below the 152.4 meters per second. So it will be in this exempted category where it's deemed not to be a firearm for certain provisions of the criminal code, but not all of them. And the not all of them becomes extremely relevant here because we have some other provisions that apply to the issues here. So first, we have the charge of carrying a weapon while attending a public meeting. So that's right here. It's section 89 sub 1. Every person commits an offense who, without lawful excuse, carries a weapon, a prohibited device, or any ammunition or prohibited ammunition while the person is attending or is on the way to attend a public meeting. There's already case law that has said that a protest is a public meeting. So now the question is this nail gun a weapon? The criminal code defines the definition of weapon includes any firearm. I already mentioned that. And so because this nail gun is a firearm for the purposes of section 2 of the criminal code, even though it's deemed not to be a firearm for certain other provisions, it is always going to be considered, legally speaking, a weapon. So this is a crime under this section. However, this is one of the few crimes that is guilty only of an offense punishable on summary conviction. So that's the first thing that he might have to worry about, but summary conviction is not the most serious. The next issue that we can run into is this one. Possession of a weapon for dangerous purpose. Every person commits an offense who carries or possesses a weapon, an imitation of a weapon, a prohibited device, or any ammunition or prohibited ammunition for a purpose dangerous to the public peace or the purpose of committing an offense. Now, this gets into an interesting question. Did he bring the nail gun for that purpose? Or is this a guy who got into an altercation, into a confrontation, and then grabbed the nail gun to defend himself, or happened to have it in his hands because he was doing something else, and then found himself defending himself? Because if he is, if it wasn't that he was carrying it for the purpose of originally like self-defense or aggression or anything like that, but was carrying it for some sort of innocent purpose beforehand and just happens to sort of convert its use, then he would be acquitted of this one. So this is another charge he might face. There are still more charges he might have to deal with, and some of these get into potentially interesting applications of the law. Now, as I mentioned, he is exempted from certain sections. Those sections include the sections requiring him to, or at least this item is excluded from being considered a firearm, from sections 91 to 95, 99 to 101, 103 to 107, and 117.03. But that includes a whole lot of other different offenses that he can still be charged with. And so we get into some really fun considerations on that one. So one of those is using firearm in commission of an offense. Every person commits an offense who uses a firearm, whether or not the person means or causes or means to cause bodily harm to any person as a result of using the firearm. And so this is basically a sentence kicker, a sentence enhancement. It says if you're using a firearm while committing some other crime, then you're going to face additional penalties. And that racks the sentence up to 14-year max. Now, he's not going to get 14 years, but this indicates that the sentence will be served consecutively with the underlying sentence. So that's a possibility there. The other one that is kind of interesting is pointing a firearm. Every person commits an offense who, without lawful excuse, and I mean, lawful excuse could be self-defense, but that'll end up getting determined, points a firearm at another person, whether the firearm is loaded or unloaded. And the punishment for that is up to 5 years. So we're really racking up the possible sentences here, and we can get into some even more interesting ones fairly shortly. The next obvious offense that he could be charged with is assault with a weapon or causing bodily harm. Every person is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term of not more than 10 years, or is guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction, who, in committing an assault, carries, uses, or threatens to use a weapon or an imitation thereof. So as mentioned before, a nail gun is always a weapon in Canadian law because it's a firearm in Canadian law. And an assault, there was allegations there that he'd fired this at people. If you throw a nail at somebody, that would be enough to make out an assault. But similarly, because an assault involves anything where you're applying force to another person, and force doesn't have to be a lot of force, it can be a small amount. But you can also commit an assault just by making somebody have an imminent apprehension that you're about to apply force to them. So if you, in the classic example, draw a fist back like you're about to swing it at them, and you never actually swing, that would still be an assault. Or if you take a knife and you slash at somebody, but they dodge and you miss, that's still an assault with a weapon. So in this case, even, you could say that there's an assault if he did actually fire at the woman who claims he fired at her, but even just that place where he lifts it up and sort of, menaces at somebody, that could also attract a charge of assault with a weapon. Now, one thing that is worth noting here is when we look at the consideration or the classification of this particular item, we can determine that this is actually a prohibited firearm. But because it's an 84 sub 3 firearm, it is still legal to possess. So when we look at the definition, handgun means a firearm that is designed, altered, or intended to be aimed and fired by the action of one hand, whether or not it has been redesigned or subsequently altered to be aimed and fired by the action of both hands. Now you see in the video, he's actually using both hands because he's using one hand to defeat the safety mechanism. But the nail gun itself is actually designed to be used with one hand. It's designed to be used by pressing it up such that the safety mechanism is activated when you push it up against presumably a wood surface. So it would seem to be a handgun. And prohibited firearm includes a handgun that has a barrel equal to or less than 105 millimeters in length. So that would appear to be a prohibited firearm under these circumstances, which is relevant in terms of sentencing considerations. It may also be relevant for certain other charges, but it means that this firearm is, technically speaking, a prohibited firearm. So all of this tells us that this person is potentially looking at some serious charges. The last I saw, the reports were that they've been arrested and they are facing charges, but that the police hadn't yet determined what those charges would be. So I guess maybe they could watch this video and that might help them come up with some ideas. But long story short, if you use a nail gun as a weapon, you can end up facing charges. And I will add a further note here, which is that some of the nail guns on the market, particularly the powder actuated nail guns, can achieve a muzzle velocity of over 500 feet per second, or the 152.4 meters per second. And in that case, then the instant that you start to, that you use them for something else, or that you intend to use them for something beyond their intended purpose, means that you could potentially be charged with all sorts of things. I'll probably do another video talking about some of the weird legal corner cases that you can get with nail guns, because those get fascinating in strange and weird ways. So I guess that's kind of our discussion of this guy. As mentioned, I don't recommend doing this at all. It's just a really bad idea. And this guy's already gotten himself into charges. I don't know which side of the altercation he's on, and I don't care for the purposes of this analysis. So I don't want to get into the politics of it right now. I just wanted to talk about the nail gun. So anyway, I hope you found this to be interesting or educational. I want to thank my Patreon supporters at the $50 level: Purple Dragonair, CCFR, Canada's National Firearms Association, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. And at the $20 level, Lindsay Metcalf, Larry Kalniak, Kyle Fox, Drunkle of the Baileys, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, Vicky, and Dorky Dane. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. Hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.